Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Velero community meeting. Today is April 20th, 2021, and we're going to go through some status updates and then dive into a few discussion topics. First up, we have Carlicia with a fantastic table of things.
Can I please go last? Trying to find my fantastic table.
Sure thing. We'll move over to Bridget for now.
Hi, everyone. So I don't have like a huge amount to report on items working towards the roadmap. I was just doing some internal follow-up stuff following the 1.6 release. But for the roadmap items, I have started some design work on plugin versioning. So I've been having some discussions with Dave around that. I'm hoping to try and get ideas and everything kind of solidified into a document and hopefully have something to share with the community soon. That's it from me, really.
Sounds good. Any questions, comments for Bridget? All right, Nolan.
Yeah, I am returning from break, catching up on stuff. I admittedly have not looked at GitHub yet this week, but I did want to say for coming up, I'm picking up some design work that I had put out before. There's an older PR for the Velero object manifest, and I'm going to go over that in the discussion topics and kind of maybe give people more context on why it's there, and then discuss an issue that I see with it as it stands.
Sounds good. I also have a question for you, Nolan. So we talked about going over roadmaps. I think we said the first week of every month.
Mm-hmm.
Should we schedule that for the beginning of May as well?
The
1.7 roadmap.
I think that makes sense. What do you, Eleanor and Dave, what do you think?
Well, what do we want to go over? I mean, we've got the 1.7 roadmaps out there. Mm-hmm. We may or may not have any adjustments to it by then.
I guess it would be a call for if anybody wants to do some work and fit it in. I think that would be a time to voice an opinion if you want to contribute a feature or try to get that design in.
Yeah, we can definitely announce that. I mean, I feel like that shouldn't need to wait for a particular time.
Yeah, it was just that we set that up to have it the first meeting of every month that we go over the roadmap, no matter if it's a new roadmap or a roadmap that we've been working on. So we would do the same thing for June and July and August and so on.
Okay, how do you feel, Eleanor?
I'm fine with whatever. I haven't been around enough to have an opinion on this. I think that the roadmap, I'm hoping in a month or two, we'll be able to have it really prioritized based on the vision, but I don't think we'll have that by May 1st. Certainly once we if we do decide to reprioritize based on the vision, for sure, we should have a meeting then for that.
So we can just put it on the discussion topics for the May meeting and see what we get.
That sounds good. Cool. Thanks. All right. Yeah, Dave, you're up.
All right. Yeah, mainly working with Eleanor on putting together the product definition, vision statements, and figuring out what we're doing next.
Sounds good. Vague and secret.
Yep. Not secret, but trying to figure it out. So
yeah, I'm kidding. Sounds good. Any questions, comments for Dave? All right, Ashish.
For me, I have been trying to scope out the work items that we want to take up for the 1.7 with respect to CSI. That's pretty much. I will have more to share once I have it. I have more concrete ideas of what and how.
Cool. Any questions, comments for Ashish? All right, going back to Carlicia.
Alrighty, so just wanted to let everybody know we have a folder on the GitHub repo with logo assets. This is for, yeah, if people want to use the Velero logo on presentations or video things, anything, those are the assets you can use. Looking at planning for 1.7, just making sure the issues are assigned to me and broken down. I started doing that work, I have not finished. I am also learning how Carvel work, mainly the YTT and CAP tooling out of that tool suite, and TLDR, it's a combination of YTT is a combination of Helm and Customize. It's pretty cool. It's very, very neat. So we're going to be, for version 1.7, we're going to have Velero artifacts that can be used with that, just like we can use Helm. And so some PRs, One thing of interest is that as I was making sure my things for 1.7 were on the board, I noticed that some that I had assigned to that milestone were not. And then I noticed that the GitHub action that does that automatically is broken. I will fix it. And then I had thought that I would add it myself, but it's all of that PR excludes that action excludes PRs from going to the board. So that means there is a bunch of things there and it's really hard to tell what's issue, what's PR. So if people maintainers, please just make sure your stuff is in there. That's what I'm doing with my issues. So I'll look at it, I'll fix it this week at some point, and that's it for me.
So first of all, thank you for adding those assets. We'll link to the VMware logo guidelines as well from the general guidelines. But yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions, comments for Carlicia?
The guidelines that I added came from our marketing, so it might be redundant if there is, I'm not recalling right now what you're talking about, but we might just maybe make sense to remove that and just point to one true source of things.
Yeah, just link to the trademark guidelines. It's because
Right,
if they update it.
I can
yeah,
deal with that if you send me this link that I'm not remembering what it is.
We'll do.
Or you can handle it too. Just
I'll send you the link later. Sure thing. This is awesome. Thank you. All right, we got 3 discussion topics to go through today. First up, we have Rahul.
Yeah. So can you open the link, Jonas? Yes. So so this is the scenario which I was trying. I created a namespace of around 150 PVs and around 150 pods. It had around 2,400 resources. And I performed around 30 odd backups and tried to delete one of the backups. And the backup remained in the deleting phase forever. And I must mention this happened without any of the Velero pods getting restarted. And thereafter, when I submitted additional delete requests, those were not picked up. So the status attribute was not getting updated for for the additional delete request CRs, which I could see. So I thought perhaps the delete controller or thread is getting stuck up. And I restarted Velero. The observation after that is, again, the original backup, which was stuck up in deleting phase, it remained there, but the newer requests were served. And thereafter, it could delete one backup, but again, for the next backup, similar thing occurred. It remained in deleting phase, and now it's in the same state. It doesn't accept additional requests. So I tried this with Velero 154 version and vSphere plugin 110. Yeah, so
Log files?
Yeah, do you have any log files that you can attach to these?
log files maybe okay. I will get the log files. You need the log files for Velero as well as backup driver as well.
Yes, please. I mean, there's a
Okay.
list of things to grab that are
Mhm.
pinned there. I'm going to put this under support. I don't think it's really I don't want to get too much of our discussion wrapped into debugging support requests unless we've got lots of time for other things. So please take this for support. We probably need to involve the vSphere team because it's probably a vSphere issue. But we
Okay.
need to find out, we need the logs and so forth. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a bug template when you open an issue that says what we need.
Okay. Sure. So while I get the logs as well, by any chance, similar issue was observed earlier, and by any chance, this might be fixed in the latest Velero version, that is 156. 154 is what I'm using, by the way.
I mean, we've really got to see the logs to know
Okay,
what
sure.
might be happening here. I mean, this is really this is a guessing game, and I don't want to
Okay.
play guessing game right now.
Sure. So yeah, I will update the required information. Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks.
Thank you, Raul. All right, next up we have Nolan.
Yeah. So I want to go over this, and I think it might be useful if I whiteboard some stuff. But to give a high level.
Do you want me to stop sharing and you can share?
Sure. So let me see, where is share content? Whiteboard. So right now, Velero backs up items one at a time, right? So you get object one, get object two, and so forth. It doesn't take into account any sort of relationship between them. What this proposal is doing is it's going to try to be a little bit more intelligent about the order in which it gets things. So the kind of main thrust of it is to, let's say, take, I'm going to take cluster API objects as an example, because this is really what spurred this on. The problem with doing these one at a time is when we restore, we could restore in alphabetical order, but that alphabetical order doesn't get dependencies right. So in cluster API, there is a cluster resource set binding that is owned by a cluster. And what Velero was doing was it was trying to restore the CRSB first. And the cluster API controller would be, hey, wait, you can't do that because it's owned by a cluster that I don't see. You don't have a cluster made yet because of how the naming resolved. The cluster came after the cluster role set binding, and that's incorrect from the controller's point of view. So what I'm proposing is essentially to have Velero follow these ownership links so that on restore, the cluster would be restored first, and then anything that depends on it. So what we want to go from is this kind of linear thing over here to a root node with another object, with other objects, with other objects, and make it more of a directed graph. In this scenario, the ownership is it's a fairly safe bet if we see a field named owner. It's a fairly safe bet that it is an object reference. However, there are other objects that may use a different field. So I was looking at some of the work that folks are doing internally on a CI type system, and they're using a field called source, and that's actually an object reference, but you wouldn't know that just by reading the YAML. So if I stop sharing, the thing I'm looking into is how do we make sure that the ownership, this link is known to Velero regardless of what the field name is named. Dave and I talked about this a little bit yesterday, and one thing we thought about was doing on the resource definition, putting an annotation that says these fields are actually references. But I also was thinking last night, for CRDs, I don't know about built-in types, but CRDs, we have an open API specification that says this field does this, this field does this, this field does this. And if we can fetch that and say, give me all the fields that are references and use that, then I think that makes this a lot easier, but I need to do some more research.
Luster git on CRDs then as permission set, which I guess we already have, so maybe it's not a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we have to do that to be able to back it up at all. But if we get the CRD and look through the schema, I think that can tell us what stuff is a link and then use that on instances. I don't want to get into the implementation, like do we cache it or things like that right now.
Are you sure you can't get it from the discovery open API?
I might be able to. And this is why I was bringing it up is
that might be a safer bet to go look at, since that is what everything ends up getting translated to, right? So CRDs and internal types get served by a discovery API. As well as aggregated API servers. So like
right.
The other thing that you have to worry about is like an aggregated API. So discovery API would probably be your best bet, I think.
But does that tell me what a field is? Like, does it tell me if it's a local reference or a object reference?
I think I don't know the spec of the open API of the output of that as well as I probably should have.
Okay, well, we can explore it. So I can look into that some more. The
question I was going to ask is, are you trying to go and look not at owner references, the like canonical owner reference, like Kubernetes owner reference? You're saying owner here as in like a reference inside of the spec to a given other resource on the cluster?
Yes.
Okay.
So that instead of just having a list of things, we have a graph and we kind of know what the dependencies are. So that when we restore, we don't restore sequentially like in a list. We restore like a graph.
No.
So
no. Oh, sorry.
yeah. Sean, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
We're going to get one graph or multiple graphs?
We may get multiple graphs.
Okay.
The root would be cluster. I imagine the root is cluster, which would then have like cluster scoped objects.
Mhm.
And then with like namespaces and things like that. But Carlicia had a question.
It's a comment that I have. So I was watching some videos, like TK GI and another video about YTT and CAP.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's YTT, but I'm not clear. One of the two has a command, and that command has a flag called tree --tree that instead of presenting a list of the objects that will be deployed. I think it's CAP because this has to do with the deploy. It will present a graph of the top objects and all of this dependency as leaves on a tree.
Mhm.
It might be worthwhile looking how they are doing it.
Mhm.
I'm pulling up the help here for the CLI, and I'm not finding, but I have to look for it.
Yeah, I tried to do something similar to this for a plugin for Sonoboy. And yeah, I remember looking, it wasn't in the project that Carlicia mentioned, but there was another one called there was like a plugin for kubectl at the time, kubectl tree. And I remember looking, and I think maybe Octant does something similar as well, given that you can dynamically look at objects within the cluster and see the relationships between them. So
Okay.
I'm wondering if there are some kind of libraries or something out there that can help make this a bit easier. Because the thing that I struggled with when trying to do it for Sonoboy is that the owner references start at the bottom of the tree and work their way up. So you can't start with a node and go down, which is the direction that you'd want.
Well, at backup time, you would have to build it up. And then at restore time, you would have to go down.
Yes. But what I mean is in terms of building the tree, it would be really nice if you could start somewhere at the higher level and have the Kubernetes APIs help you form that tree, but a bit more DIY.
Yeah, well, this is good to know, because if there's prior art, we can leverage that for some aspect of this.
So I think I'm a little confused on the ordering. Like in this representation, would we do, for example, the PVs first, then the cluster?
Well, I guess actually this representation may be inaccurate. So we'd probably start like this, because, like you say, Dave, there's no cluster object. Cluster scoped objects would have to get restored just directly into the cluster you're on, or your target.
Okay. I was thinking that was like the CAPI cluster object.
No, not necessarily. I mean, it could be, but let's say I'm on an existing cluster. I think you'd be right in that cluster scoped resources could be unordered.
I was just actually thinking back to the particular example, like the CAPI example.
Yeah.
So there we have like a cluster resource, and I was unclear on the ordering that was required.
Right. So the cluster resource has to exist first.
Before what?
Before the cluster resource set binding, which is a CRD that says these nodes, like VMs and metal nodes or whatever, belong to this cluster. And we kind of kludged around it by adding those two definitions to Velero's default restore priorities. But I think that's a temporary workaround, and we can't chase down all of these and maintain that list perfectly accurate. So if we can say cluster level objects can be restored in roughly any order in relation to themselves, and then, for example, instances of CRDs need to have the CRD existing first, then we know that. And if they have some other thing that needs to be resolved first, we'll have the information to figure that out.
Yeah. So ordering wise, so like, for example, if the cluster has VMs that the CAPI cluster, not Kubernetes cluster, but the CAPI cluster object. So it has VMs, we'd restore the VMs first, right? Then the cluster object, then the CRSB.
I believe that's correct.
I think that won't work, right? So for the nodes to be there, they need to belong to a cluster. That's the exact problem we are trying to solve. We first create the cluster, and then we create the resources that belong to the cluster. So for example, if we have to create a load balancer object, I don't think that proposal has been implemented yet, but the load balancers will also be represented as a CRD. So if you want to create a load balancer that represents the load balancer that is used by the API server, we need to create the cluster which will use that as the load balancer before we create that load balancer object. So the load the load balancer object is owned by the cluster. So the cluster has to be created.
And
The
what-
owner has to be created first before you create whatever it owns.
When we say, just to be clear, when we're saying owned here, you do not mean owner reference. You mean
Yes.
something else.
Yes, I mean
Uh,
owner reference.
yeah,
I mean
owner
owner reference. I don't know what.
it is set up as owner reference. Actually, hang on. I'm not sure about specifically about the load balancer proposal, top of my head, but there are certain fields that are owner references and certain fields that are not. But yeah, did that clarify your question,
No.
Sean?
Yeah, I think I'm with Dave. I think I'm kind of confused.
So
Let me bring something out that I can talk. Okay. So the way the CAPI clusters are set up is there's a cluster object which represents the definition of a Kubernetes cluster in terms of what cluster version, what Kubernetes version, and what cluster infrastructure belongs to the cluster. With me so far?
Yeah.
So when we are backing up, we back up everything. But when we're restoring, we first need to, there's an ordering requirement. We first need to restore the cluster object, which is at the root. And then once that happens, we only then can we create resources which will have the cluster object as the owner reference.
So currently,
Making sense?
when we're doing the management cluster restore, we actually have the management cluster paused so that it's not reconciling, which is kind of a special
Yes.
case for cluster API.
So yeah, what is paused there is when you create machine object, like when you create machine deployments or anything, you don't want the CAPI controllers to start creating machines for you because the machines may already exist.
Mhm.
Right? So that is the scenario where you say, hey, pause reconciliation for this cluster. I am going to be creating objects, and then you will see everything mapped together once I have restored everything, restored all resources. And then you unpause. Then, for example, if one of the machine died or whatever, after unpause, the reconciler or the controller is going to kick in and then go provision more machines.
Right. So the thing is that CAPI's got a special case here where we can pause the reconciliation loop. Other
can I
operators
pause?
are not.
Can I?
Yeah.
No.
We are
Can I pause?
diverging Yep.
That has nothing to do with this.
Yes.
It does, because the order that you're restoring things in here is you're talking about a top-down restoration.
Mhm.
And for like other operators, we're doing bottom up so that the reconciliation loop doesn't kick in early. So pausing the reconciliation loop on CAPI lets you do a top-down restoration because the reconciler is not running, the controller is not creating resources because you paused and you said, don't create like VMs for this cluster. But that's not the general case at the moment.
I get what you're saying. So you're saying if there's a not a cluster, but like a foo resource which has other owner reference, if you create the foo resource which is at the root first, then if there is no pause, the reconciler may look at it and start doing things.
Well,
Yeah, does that make sense?
I don't think that that's necessarily true, right? If it's a true owner reference and you create an object that says my owner is this thing, and that thing doesn't exist, the Cube garbage collector will just delete that thing, won't it?
So
That owner's
Here-
gone, it gets deleted. Bye.
here's the thing I'm trying to solve. I think I'm not stating this correctly. So let's ignore cluster API. Let's think about PVCs and PVs. I have a PVC. It has a name of a PV, right?
Mhm.
That reference will not work until the PV exists, right? Because you need to have a name to an existing resource. So in that case, we have to create a PV, and then the PVC points to it.
But can't you create the PV after the PVC, and it will reconcile eventually? Like, isn't that
You could, but
the question I'm getting at is, isn't that the way Cube is supposed to work? And
yes,
if we end up doing this, are we encouraging? Are we optimizing for behavior that we should probably maybe not be optimizing for? I guess it would be the next set of questions that I would ask Nolan.
So Cube should reconcile this. I have a bug filed with Cluster API team for their behavior. However, we as a backup tool should not be enforcing API contracts. We should be restoring stuff as is, not necessarily strictly as is. My goal here is to get Velero so that it's more intelligent for designers of applications, and they don't have to worry as much. Now, should most of them be doing stuff that can reconcile afterwards? Yes. Should lots of CRDs not need status to be restored? Yes, but there's people that want us to restore status. So I think you're right in a sense, Sean, but I don't think it's going to be on us to enforce these API contracts.
Yeah. And we've seen that multiple times, especially with the way CRDs are implemented, with states being stored in status and not the controllers reconciling state and like updating the status as based on what they see. And it becomes hard for a tool like Velero to have strong opinions about how controllers and CRDs should be implemented.
So I'm still curious, like about how the owner refs would work. Say for the PVC PV case, would that apply at all?
In that case, it's not an owner ref. It's just that is literally, the type is literally object reference.
Yep.
Owner refs are a special cased version of an object reference, where if the owner doesn't exist, then the object will get garbage collected, which is another reason why the owner should exist first.
Right, but if somebody's doing like some kind of reconciliation loop there, will that cause problems?
Yeah, it might. I now I'm seeing what you're saying. It might,
Yeah.
And we can't solve that for every case, I don't think.
I think we can't solve.
Right.
I think that goes back to my earlier point, which is like, if you're restoring objects in Kubernetes, should you not expect Kubernetes objects to behave like Kubernetes objects?
They don't. Well, part of the problem is that one of the things Kubernetes is doing is if an object disappears, it may go ahead and say, "Oh, okay, I should make a new one."
Mhm.
Right, and that's good behavior in the normal running case. In the restore case, that may not be the behavior we want, and that's where things are. I think that's what's biting us a lot.
Yes, and why would you restore so if we know that that's what is going to happen because it's owned by that resource, why are you restoring the owned resource if the owner is going to recreate it? It says I own this thing, therefore when you create that thing, it should create the owned resource, right?
Let me give you an example.
For the owner reference case, not for the object reference case, right? Like, I think there's two different cases here and we probably want to divide them. So like the object reference case is different than the owner reference case, right?
So in the owner reference case, let's say you want to use Restic with Velero. We have to restore the pod, not the deployment, because of the Restic logic. That's kind of our burden to bear. With things like Cluster API, if you want to reclaim a running VM that is not accounted for, then you wouldn't want the controller to reconcile, because if it did, it's going to create a brand new VM, which is why you would be doing all this pausing to say, yes, I'm restoring, but there's a VM that already exists that I want you to tie to. I don't want you to make a brand new one. That's an example.
Okay. Isn't that a really good use case for a plugin for this very specific thing, and not something that we would want to build in like the main tool?
I don't want to build in logic that figures out the pausing. What I'm trying to do is express the object graph, not necessarily, instead of just a straight linear list. I want to be able to understand the relationship between things. There may be extra work that has to be done with that relationship, but I want to be able to visualize these dependencies. And the other thing that was going to fall out of this is, if we have this complete list, we can do set comparison to say, does this backup overlap with this backup? And if so, don't do a concurrent restore. So there's other things that can come out of it. So this proposal right now, as stands, is to just write this data, not use it for a restore, because you're bringing up some good points. And I think the first step is to have this data and then work on what's the proper restore case.
I would say, why don't we take a look at like some 80-20 stuff? So like your proposal on owner graphs probably covers 80%. And then we have like an additional, like some way for both the application and the user to specify a strict ordering. So they may, so some way you can write a CRD that says, order these resources like this. And I'd like to make this something that's available to the user, because, like Sean, your point on making a plugin isn't a bad one, but what happens is people get applications that some random person wrote, they're installing it, and then they're doing a backup and restore, and they're like, it doesn't work. And the actual maintainer of the application may not be interested in creating a plugin for it. And the plugin right now is pretty heavyweight in terms of the amount of work to build one in Velero. So I'm thinking that we could have like a generic case, a thing that lets you override something that will probably cover the other, 29%, and then, then the last 5% is like, okay, you really need to write a plugin to do this. How does that sound as like just a basic guideline here?
Yeah, I think that 80-20 makes sense. And if we cover the owner reference, and we may have to look at object references as well. If we cover those two scenarios, we should be covering 80% of the cases.
I want to reiterate, this is not going to be a complete solution, because for things that don't just reconcile, we may have to, they may have to write a plugin. As Sean pointed out, sometimes the correct thing to do will be to manifest new resources, for like, just let the controllers do their thing. But as the state of the world is right now with a lot of apps, yes, they should be designed for a certain way for Kubernetes. They're not. That's kind of the reality of it. Even Velero is not a super good a good example of completely declarative stuff. And for it to be a useful tool, I don't think we can expect everyone to maintain perfect API contracts.
I think it would be better if we solve this just looking at it from looking at things as Kubernetes objects, and not bringing what the controllers may or may not do, because that we are being asked to back up Kubernetes objects, we will back up and restore Kubernetes objects. Whatever the controllers does, then it's up to the controllers, and we have no control over the controllers.
I would make an argument that the world that I'm presenting is actually more in line with the Kubernetes API. But yeah, like if you have an owner reference, right, it literally means that thing is the owner of it.
Yeah.
It owns it. Why is some other process creating that resource, right?
I think you're making a case against Velero as a whole at that point.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I am. I think I'm making a case against backing up owned resources.
Well, we
Which
do
is a
that
different-
now. We do that now.
Yeah, which is a different
which
is a different
We've
case, right?
created
Like,
plugins for that to do. I mean,
yeah,
for our plugins on our side, with our migration, we're actually overriding that functionality and not not restoring pods that have owner references. But the default, when you don't have that plugin, is that their Velero installs or restores it.
correct. Well, I think that's the point I'm getting at, Scott. Is like I think that's the more correct behavior, and I'm
Yeah, that
attempting
was
to
actually
bring
the
that
original
up.
behavior. I noticed at some point it was added, and I was before I was working on this. I was just looking at the history at one point. The original version did not restore pods that had owners, and then at some point it was added. Perhaps someone wanted it. I don't know. Maybe that should be configurable top level. That's a different discussion, I guess.
Not another flag. No.
No,
Yeah.
I remember what you're talking about, Scott, and I don't remember the bug that we ran into, but yeah, that's how Velero works. Like, oh, throw in a reference, just let it do the thing.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it was because of the Rustic support that we decided to do pods that way or not.
We hit bugs. It might have been Rustic support. And in our case, we're actually creating separate pods for Rustic that don't have owner references. And so our pods with owner references we're not restoring. And I actually ran into problems. I think it was with daemon sets and something else where if we restored the pod that had the owner reference on restore, the cluster was creating another pod and we ended up having duplicated pods because the owner references themselves weren't getting preserved. And so I just wrote a plugin to nuke those and say, if there's an owner reference for a pod, don't restore it.
Yeah. And stateful sets are another huge edge case that we don't handle well because those assume ordering and stuff, and those are a special case in Kubernetes.
They assume they own the resources that they're creating, right? When they say they own it, they assume that they own it. Like,
right, but people want to get their data back. Like if we just let the controller do it, they're not going to get their data back.
Yeah.
Why? Sorry, I'm confused by that.
If you have it create, if you have the stateful set recreate all of its pods, it has no information on what volumes they were linked to. So those pods will manifest and get new PVs.
Okay. Yep. I see the problem. Thank you. I apologize.
No, it's you're right that this is all weird, and Velero is doing these weird inversions of how Kubernetes is supposed to work. That's the challenge, I think, is getting it correct. And part of the thing we need to do is like evangelism with people writing controllers and apps to say, hey, maybe be aware that you're not the only thing creating these objects. I mean, a person could just kubectl apply a thing, and that may not be the right thing to do. But yeah, Kubernetes offers a lot of foot guns when you want to do things in an ordered fashion.
Yes, that's actually what I'm. that's the reason I am trying to push back on the feature, because whenever you try to order things in Kubernetes, it feels like it's always a fraught process.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
I think if we have like overrides, so I mean, we'd like to move towards the model where the controllers are actually involved in their own backup and restore, but it's going to take some time.
Yeah, that requires work on the controller's part, at which point they will need to do work for the Velero team for Velero to be used to back up their stuff.
I'm going to do a time check here There's an issue out that I would like people to reply on. I'm looking on at least getting the proposal to a state that people can agree on in 1.7. I specifically say in the proposal, I don't want to address the restore of the data right now. I'm just trying to get to a point where we can have this data. But I guess I wanted to introduce it and see and show some of the problem cases I was having. And Sean, I would actually really appreciate if you commented there so we have a documentation of these issues raised. But I'd also like to give time back because I see we have 2 other topics.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no.
Yeah,
This
no
is
worries.
good discussion.
This is exactly what we have the discussion time for.
Yep. Your point is well taken at this point.
Yeah.
It is tough. And we are getting ourselves into a something that may be a no-win situation. But if we can give tools to controllers to participate in their restore, I think that's probably the better long-term play.
All right, great discussion. So we got 2 more topics. Ayush, it looks like there's a support issue. Would that be correct?
Yes. So actually, I'm facing one issue while restoring a namespace which has a couple of PVs. So I took a backup of a namespace with few PVs, did not update it, no changes. After that, I tried to restore the same without restore PV option. I'm trying to override this namespace. And it seems like the download the snapshot operation is failing and the retrial logic is going in indefinite as an infinite loop.
Yeah,
and-
so again, I mean, I'm going to stop you here because this is
Sure.
a support issue. We'd ask you to open something on GitHub
Sure.
and logs, please logs.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't do live debugging. It's not going to work.
Sure.
This is also a good topic to bring for office hours on Thursdays.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, sounds good. Sorry.
Yeah.
I have logs. I'll update create one issue.
So,
Awesome.
hey Dave, this is Amber.
Amber.
I think so. We were facing these challenges, and we thought we'll bring it up to your attention. Of course, we will provide all the logs and whatnot, and we can talk about this on Friday. But one thing which we have seen is repeated this thing that something was working in the previous version of the plugin, and now it is not working. Ayush, you can correct me, right? I think the way it is in the previous version, this functionality was not a problem, but in the latest version, it seems to be a broken thing. So I'm just trying to understand what type of test cases we have when we are moving from a different version to a different version. Are these things covered? Because that is something that we'll like to see if there is a way we can also contribute. Because these breaking changes is really hard on us, right? I mean, we are in this tail end of this thing and we're finding all these issues. So just trying to understand where we can.
Yeah, I think especially with the vSphere plugin, you know, it underwent basically a huge re-architecture as a result of Project Pacific. So we do have a set of tests. It's something we can bring up with Xing and the vSphere test team and see if these cases are being covered.
Sure.
I think we should see if Xing can attend these meetings too.
Oh, the plugin team does not attend this meeting?
It used to be me, but now I'm no longer the plugin team. So
Okay. Yeah. All right. So just wanted to bring it to your attention and maybe we can get some urgent help on this. That would be helpful.
Good thing. Thank you, Amber. All right, we got one more for Eleanor here.
Double muted. Right. I'm maybe the newest one to this team. I think that's probably fair. And yeah, I mean, I've still been here a month now, but nonetheless, that's still pretty new. And in short, we're seeing different faces every time at the community meetings. And I would just love to know sometimes they turn out to be from VMware, sometimes you all turn out to not be from VMware. So I was wondering if we could kind of in some way identify at these community meetings who folks are and what their affiliation is. So I don't have to do sleuthing, kind of Googling behind the scenes. So I guess, Jonas, you had an idea of a role. You said other community meetings to do roll call. Could you tell us what that's like?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to do this is to ask everyone in the beginning of the meeting to just add in their name and affiliation in the meeting notes, because then people can just continue to add in there and we will see who is there. It's easy to see when we look back at meetings as well, who was in those meetings and who listened in on the discussions. Instead of having a physical roll call on video and audio.
That works perfectly for my purposes. Thank you very much. And does anyone have any objection to this? Of course, you don't have to put your affiliation if you don't want to, but it would just be helpful for all of us to understand the perspective that you're speaking from. But does anyone have any objections?
No objection to that. The way I've seen this work in some of the other SIG meetings is like there's an attendees section in the meeting notes, and everybody just adds their name to that list. I added an attendees section to today's meeting. So if you all want to go up to add yourself to that list, we can get that process going from today.
Thank you very much.
I missed your addition, Ashish. I added that section for next week's meeting.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, let's every week. I think it's a great idea. So we add name and company. And then whoever is running the meeting can remind everybody to do that.
Great. Thank you all. Really appreciate it. And that was it for me. Fast.
Awesome. Thank you. You can stop sharing as well, Ashish, I think.
It's me.
It was Khaleesi, sorry. Awesome. And then we have one contributor shout out that we want to do as well. So I'm going to share my screen quickly here so you can all see it. There we go. So we got one contributor shout out here for Tobias.
Yeah, so this is an enhancement to the Helm chart that adds or exposes the disable controllers argument to the Helm chart. This could be useful if you're doing Velero in a restore only mode and don't want any of the controllers for backup to start at all, or if you want to do some other custom stuff. So thank you, Tobias, for that change.
Yeah, might be Tobias. I'm going with the Swedish pronunciation.
It could be Swedish. I don't know.
You never know. Awesome. Thank you. And with that, that is the last item of today of the Velero community meeting of April 20th, 2021. Have a fantastic rest of the week, everyone, and see you all next week.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.